Hello everybody, my name is Martijn Lofvers. I'm Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You might also know me as Editor-in-Chief of the European quarterly magazine called Supply Chain Movement. I will be the moderator of this interesting webinar about S&OP and beyond. Actually, the next wave in S&OP. And we have an interesting discussion looking forward to it. And looking at the agenda, we'll talk about S&OP, the why of S&OP, also about Solventure, what's their vision as a implementation partner of Arqiva, and also what is the evolution in tooling, and what's beyond that, what's next. This webinar will be recorded, and you can request for a PDF of the presentations. All listeners are on mute, but feel free to ask questions. You will see on the right-hand side a questions panel or a questions pane where you can type in your questions. And of course, we have a Q&A at the end, but if you have already questions during the presentation, during the discussion, feel free to ask your questions. If this question is in line of the discussion we are having, then we'll ask this question right away, and the expert will try to answer. All right, with me, I have two experts on S&OP. Bram Desmet, welcome.
Hi, Martijn.
And next to him is Nick Verstraete. Welcome.
Hi, Martijn.
All right.
Nice
so they are both from Solventure. Bram, could you explain briefly who you are and what's your background?
Well, I'm the CEO of Solventure. I've been in supply chain now for 15 years. Before that, I worked in IT. And yeah, I try not to be the ordinary supply chain guy, but somebody who is really passionate, also is doing some teaching in that and is writing books on that. And we will share, I think, part of that passion in the webinar today.
Okay. And Nick, briefly introduction from your side.
Yeah, I'm currently the Chief Technology Officer at Solventure. Background in the implementation of supply chain planning processes at a variety of customers for the past 10 years. So also very passionate about the supply chain practice and also how systems can support a good implementation of the supply chain processes within global organizations. So, nice to be here.
Okay, thanks. Bram, to kick it off, why should we talk about sales and operations planning? Could you explain why it's so important and what is the background?
Well, it is an important question because I've met people who say we want to do S&OP, and and they say basically, well, how do I get it sold? And then I ask them like, yeah, but what are your issues? Do you have service issues? I know the service is okay. What about the cost? Cost is under control. We don't have pressure on inventory because we are a family-owned company. Well, it's simple. If you don't have issues, then maybe you don't need S&OP. So we shouldn't put the horse before the bandwagon. And when analyzing why we would need S&OP, yeah, we typically use our supply chain triangle, and that triangle is also described here in that book you see on the top right. And that triangle, after being 15 years in the field, captured for me what is supply chain and what is supply chain management about. And I noticed that companies struggle with balancing this triangle, that in general, marketing people or sales people are more service oriented, that operations is more cost oriented, and that's where it sometimes stops. It's like the eternal debate between sales and between operations. I also see that inventories then make huge swings as a result, and inventory is here the cash side of the triangle. Until finance says, dear sales and operations, we need to play this game with less inventory and with a constantly lower inventory. And okay, when we need to balance the triangle with less inventory and a constantly lower inventory, that's when we really create pressure on the triangle. And before we do S&OP, we often start with this type of exercise and we say, okay, within our company, how do we struggle with balancing the triangle?
And is it the role of the supply chain manager or director to stand in the middle of this triangle to make it work, and look at all the different directions and balancing all this? And maybe that's also where the supply chain director is the ambassador or the initiator of sales and operations planning or the process.
Yeah, well, the question is a bit what's the as is and what's the to be. Yeah, I think supply chain is probably the only function today which has a metric on each of the corners. Supply chain is typically responsible for the on-time and full delivery performance, like for logistics costs, and also is responsible for the inventory. So supply chain today is probably, and I also noticed that it's often supply chain who gets the responsibility to lower the inventory. Yeah, but to lower the inventory, you need to bring balance in the triangle. So supply chain is more or less a bit pushed to the middle of the triangle, but we will come back to that at the end of the presentation. Supply chain doesn't always have the position or all of the tools to really bring balance in the triangle. S&OP is probably the best guess or the best take, but we should bring more to supply chain as tools to really bring balance to the triangle. So it's supply chain today is still for me a semi-operational function. Has the implicit responsibility to balance the triangle, so implicitly is in the middle, and I think going forward we should make it more explicit, and indeed supply chain should really be at the heart of the triangle.
And how do you address this triangle if you go into a company?
How we address it?
Yeah, so how do you start if you go into a company and discuss this?
Well, I'll give an example 2 slides down, and before I come to that, something else to mention is that when I explain this principle, people recognize it and people relate to it, but they often also question like, yeah, but is this not how companies work? Yeah? Won't there always be conflicting objectives between sales and operations and finance, and won't different departments not always talk a different language? And while that's maybe how many people think, there is an important reason to balance the triangle, and that's explained on this slide. We say, okay, if I look at the triangle from an investor's perspective, service is basically a driver for the top line. If I improve my service and I don't sell more, then something must be broken. But I'm not only looking for the top line, I'm also looking for a margin. Well, if I combine the top line and the cost, I get to the bottom line, the EBIT or the EBITDA or the gross margin, but I get to a kind of a margin. And it's even not only about the margin, it's really about, yeah, what's the margin you generate over the invested capital, over the capital employed, which in financial terms is the return on capital employed, or like the Americans would say, the bang for the buck. So if I give you $1, if I invest $1, what do you give as a margin in return? So balancing the triangle is not something, let's say, that is optional. No, balancing the triangle is something that is mandatory. And so if people would question whether we need balance, I think this is the way to convince them and say, well, no, we really need to do this. And how do we start? This is typically how we start. I often say, before you talk about S&OP, draw a triangle. Draw a triangle: service, cost, cash, capital employed. Gather a cross-functional team, people from sales, marketing, finance, operations, purchasing, and try to think through, okay, if we look at our company, what is our challenge? What do we struggle with when it comes to the triangle? And simply asking that question always leads to a certain result and a certain focus. And once we agree on where the issue is, it's also much easier to start proposing S&OP as part of the solution.
Yeah, I have a question. Also when you look at the financial slide, but we don't have to go back, but with the EBIT, there's also like, profit is earn to churn, and earn is your profit margin and churn is your inventory turns. But it's also depending on what kind of business strategy you have. Is it operational excellence with high inventory turns, or is it customer intimacy or product leadership with lower inventory turns? Is that also something you would address in this environment with the poster sessions?
Yes, I think it's crucial, certainly when you set targets for inventory. Yeah? So if you have more complexity because you are innovating in certain products, and you want to have products which are top notch, well, these products will be more complex, and complexity creates inventory. So, and it's important that you understand that as a consequence, you will have more inventory, which is fine, because if you have good products, you can also typically earn a premium. So you will have a higher margin. So you cannot look at EBIT and inventory in isolation. Typically, an operational excellence leader will have simpler products, a simpler product portfolio, so he will have less inventory or higher inventory turns. But also the margins there typically are a bit lower. And certainly, I see that a lot of supply chain people are under pressure to reduce inventories, but sometimes you can go too far. There is a certain level of inventory which comes with a certain strategy, and maybe the problem is not in the inventory, but the problem is in the margin. And if that's the issue, if the issue is that the strategy is not clear, we use that same triangle to bring up the strategy issue. If the strategy is clear, then you can just use the triangle to say, okay, where is the issue and what do we want to solve with S&OP?
Yeah, no, I get questions from companies for benchmarks, and I ask, what's your strategy? Are you an Action or an IKEA with operational excellence, or are you more a high-end like Apple product leader or Rituals, whatever, and there's totally different approach and strategy and totally different, data on inventory and turns.
Yeah, we have tools for that. It's not shown here, but we have tools basically via surveys that allow you to bring up the strategy. And we have financial tools where you can bring in different types of competitors, some more operational excellence, some more product leadership, visualize what is the financial impact of the chosen strategy, and for instance, help you to come to more realistic inventory targets. I don't have it in this presentation, but it's certainly something we can follow up with people if they are interested in that.
All right, let's talk about S&OP. So, Bram, what's your vision or your definition of sales and operations planning?
Yeah. Well, this one slide basically summarizes the vision, and part of it I think is more traditional. So you have demand, you have inventory, you have supply, and okay, that's already challenging in itself. So nothing bad about that. But we typically also try to think about segmentation. I often say a lot of companies use the same service level for all customers and all products, and simply saying that already reveals that this cannot be the correct solution. So thinking through on what are more strategic customers, and two customers never have the same volume, the same margin, the same willingness to innovate, the same loyalty to you as a company. So how do we differentiate between customers, and how do we also differentiate between products? Some products more reflect the past, others more the future. Some are easy to produce, others are a pain in the neck to produce. And thinking through the segmentation really helps in steering the rest of the process. Once you know who are the A customers, you stop guessing what these customers will buy from you. If it's A customers, you will have a collaborative process with the customer. So you will extend your forecasting really into the belly of the customer. Once you know which are the A customers or A products, you will reserve capacity, or you will prioritize those streams if needs to be done. And also when it comes to inventory, you don't want to invest money in less strategic product. You want to be best in class and have the best possible service in the most strategic product. So segmentation is key because it creates a compass that allows you to use the S&OP process to better navigate towards better business goals. So that's, I think, something which we add and which is less common. It's also typically, it's not really supported in tooling. And within the Arqiva suite, we have some tools which also help you to create a segmentation and to embed the segmentation in the other process steps.
I have a remark on that, because I question, I ask a lot of questions to companies, do you do segmentation and on what level? And I asked, do you ABC analysis on products and ABC analysis on clients? Say yes, yes. But do you do an ABC analysis on products and clients or customers at the same time? So you get a matrix of AA articles and customers and CC articles and customers. And basically you can get rid of these CC articles next day because they are not profitable and those customers are not that profitable. But most of the times companies don't do that. Yeah. Why is that?
I think because of a lack of courage. It's what I see is that sales is typically good in doing a customer segmentation, and they do it from a sales perspective, not from a supply chain perspective. And supply chain is good in doing a product segmentation, and supply chain doesn't dare to do a customer segmentation because that's sales territory, and sales is not doing a product segmentation because they don't see it as a concern. And if you want to bring the two together, you really need to bring sales together, marketing together, because marketing really has the strategic product view, not just the operational view. You need to bring operations together, you need to bring supply chain together, and if you want to do it on financial numbers, you need to bring finance. And so you need to bring the full organization together. And if there are hard, tough calls to be made, it's typically the BU president or a BU director who needs to oversee the overall process. So, and don't ask me why, but it seems like companies by themselves don't easily get engaged in this type of exercise. And when they do get themselves engaged and they try to do it on their own, it seems easy. It seems like, okay, we will take a couple of BI reports and we will do some stuff in Excel, but it's also a change process. So if companies do it and they try to do it on their own, it fails. So it's probably the project where I've seen most failed implementation. So it seems easy, but it's not, because you need to bring the different functions around the table, and you need to have, it's also very sensitive because it reveals margins, it reveals really what are the better customers and the worst customers, and the better products and the worst products. So it's also very sensitive, and you need to make tough calls which need to be really carried top down. So, but if you do it, it makes a world of difference. And my advice would be, look for somebody, look for outside advice, and look for somebody who has done it before, who knows how to carry an organization through this difficult and sensitive exercise.
But in the last month, last half year, we saw that the Unilever has cut their SKUs by 65% because of COVID-19. There were restraints, which you have not. Temporarily, they have reduced their SKUs to a large extent. So I think actually now is the time to reduce your SKUs.
Well, there's two times when segmentation is popular. In crisis times, because you need to make choices anyway, or in the opposite, when you have a lack of capacity. When you are not under pressure to reduce inventories or to save on costs, and you have enough capacity, that's probably the most difficult timing to do a segmentation exercise.
Yeah, and product management is also an important step. What kind of products are you going to introduce? Some CPG companies are replacing 45% of their whole portfolio every year, so that's enormous.
Yeah, that's true. So there we typically say there's two sides of the coin. One, product management or product lifecycle management or portfolio management is about phase-ins. And I often say 7 out of 10 new product introductions are overstated. That's normal. And all product managers are optimistic, otherwise they would be in the wrong job. But it creates that if you don't watch out, you already have non-moving inventories for new product launches because they fail. And at the same time, you don't want to be out of stock for the 3 out of 10 that are more successful than anticipated. So if there is a lot of uncertainty, face it and explicitly address it by a separate process step into the S&OP process. And the second thing is that companies are very good at introducing new products, but very bad at taking old stuff out. So if you don't watch out, the portfolio keeps on increasing. And if the portfolio keeps on increasing, it makes the whole process more difficult. It starts weighing on the demand process, on the inventory, on the supply planning. You start losing efficiency, you start having excess inventory. So the number of SKUs is almost like the cholesterol in your body. A bit of it is good, but you need to continuously monitor it. And certainly for if 20% of your products are new every year, you need to have a very strong and solid separate product management step to stay healthy. That's almost it. And a lot of companies don't watch it for 5 years, and then we run into a crisis, and then we use the more rough axe, and then we cut or chop off whole pieces. But instead of doing it once every 5 years, if you know that 20% of the portfolio will be new, yeah, then get organized. Then you really should embed it into a recurring process and not wait till it's very hard to bear.
So getting on with the presentations, we have more slides to go. So what are the steps getting to well, the right running S&OP with the right tooling?
Yeah, so I would almost say in this slide, think about what's the longer term ambition, and where do we start. And for all of these slides, we do have vision paper. So we have a vision paper which describes this in more detail. So if people are triggered, they can leave a message with us, and we can send them more information. And if you look at S&OP, yeah, it's a lot of companies struggle with getting it right. And we've tried to compile 7 steps where we say, okay, if you don't respect one of the steps, it can lead to troubles down the road. So this is almost a bit our 15 years of implementing S&OP. How do you get organized in a structured way? I think needless to say that it's not just about the tooling. So people very easily get into the tooling, and a fool with a tool is still a fool. So we will need to think about the processes. We will also need to think about the capabilities, and it really begins with awareness. So I see organizations that say, well, we don't do forecasting today, and we want to have salespeople start putting in forecasts in a forecasting system. Well, that's a huge change. So you need to make sure that people understand why they are doing that. So think about awareness. There we are very happy with using the triangle, as I briefly showed, and create the awareness before you start talking about S&OP as a solution. Explain to people what S&OP is about. If they need to make a forecast, what the forecast will be used for. Yeah, so create a common ambition, a burning platform, also a common language. Create a roadmap. Rome wasn't built in one day, but okay, make sure that you have the long-term view in mind. So do we start with segmentation, or will we start with demand? Or do we want to start with inventory? Because maybe if we start with inventory, we can show benefits. Well, make a deliberate choice on where it makes most sense in your specific situation, where to start, but also make sure that you keep the long-term roadmap clear. Fixing one piece will not fix the thing. It's a process, and the process is only as strong as its weakest link. Engage stakeholders. So still a lot of people try to do this on top of the regular job. Well, if you do it on top of the regular job, it's not going to work. So and it's better to have a somewhat tougher debate upfront than ignoring a lack of capacity or a lack of buy-in, because it will only lead to troubles down the road. And okay, if you take it more seriously, the cost will get more important. But okay, face it, if you are doing this, you are really at the heart of the triangle. So you should be able to improve service, reduce cost, and be more efficient in the utilization of working capital and fixed assets. So you are really touching the heart of the financial structure of your business. So yeah, be tough, be real. So okay, this is not a small project and it's not an easy thing to do, but we also have the opportunity to make a structural difference. And if you have all of that done right, then the rest is more traditional, I would say. Of course, you need to design your processes, your tools, your data structures. You need to start working on the tool, training key users and so on. So that's the traditional stuff. And last thing we try to embed here is that we see a lot of projects where, okay, once the tool gets live, we think it's finished, but that's the opposite is true. So once the tool is brought live, that's where it starts, because that's where we need to start running the new process, and that's where we start generating the value that we anticipated in the beginning. So we are very good at making business cases because we have to, but many of those business cases are never revisited. Well, no, we should put our money where our mouth is. So once we made a commitment to come to certain improvements, it's also important that we monitor those improvements and not just forecast accuracy. Also, what is the impact on financial KPIs? And here again, we have described that in more detail, and it's our approach we try to bring to the table as a kind of a checklist to make sure that if we do it properly, and we do it with a long-term value generation objective.
What I see is very important in the S&OP implementation is change management. It's also readiness assessment up front on all the different levels, and who are your ambassadors in the business function to make sure that all people involved are prepared on what to come in the whole implementation phase.
Yeah, that's and the question is a bit, how do you map that? And there again, I think we've been very successful by instead of jumping immediately to the solution, being S&OP, start with the problem. So where is our problem? If you don't have a problem, then don't do S&OP. Also making the link to strategy. So who are we? Who do we want to be? If like you said, product leadership, operational excellence. Also commercial people easily connect to those more strategic questions. And if all of a sudden they realize that they will need strong operational planning to be able to deliver the strategy to the customer or to the business, any resistance you face is almost gone immediately. So and that really helps to get things started in a much better way. So and it almost seems like overkill, but it's not, because if you wait with those questions, they come back at a time when they are much more difficult to solve and address.
Right. Now let's look at the tooling, because you are implementation partner of Arqiva.
Yep.
So Nick, so what's new? So can you talk about something more about the tooling of Solventure?
Yeah, indeed. To give a glance on what Arqiva is as a solution, and then also identify a number of topics which are recent additions and innovations. Maybe let's first talk a bit about what is the planning landscape. Arqiva is a well-established tool within the planning landscape. It's in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for several years now. And I think this picture describes quite well where you need to see Arqiva. And what we see also in an evolution is that more and more these planning systems, which were like supply chain focused, get broader and broader, and also evolve towards more enterprise-wide planning platforms. And it's almost what you also see here on this picture, where we see an overview of different planning activities going from on the vertical axis, from operational to tactical and to the strategic canvas, with a clear linkage to the execution layer, where we get into the area of the ERP system. And you see on the horizontal axis, like it goes from source side over make, deliver, and sales, on how do you get from raw materials, everything planned towards fulfilling the customer demand, identifying and fulfilling that customer demand. And of course, there are very classic planning topics depicted on there. You have like demand planning or forecasting. Of course, it's out there for several decades by now. But you see more and more that it also all much more clearly starts to link in with more new elements. So if you go in that mid zone, you see demand planning, product lifecycle management, where we discussed about, and then inventory optimization, RCCP, S&OP, and getting visibility on the S&OP manager layer, like getting insights and KPIs. But then when we go even a bit more higher up to that strategic canvas, we get into budget planning. And budget planning is really a quite hot topic when we talk the last 2-3 years with companies. Much more companies are at the stage that they're well established on their core planning activities, but that they need a clear integration with finance. And it's then all about like how do we achieve that financial reconciliation, for example.
If you look at the lower bar on the chart, you see ERP vendors. So in the old days, like 10, 20 years ago, a lot of companies tried to integrate this in one ERP environment. But that seems to have changed, that a lot of bolt-on APS, S&OP kind of systems are getting implemented. So how that have evolved, because MRP was the core of a lot of ERP systems. So what has happened in the real planning world?
It's a good observation. And often when we talk about ERP is an awesome. A lot of ERP systems and vendors are awesome at it. Like for example, let's take the biggest on the market for kind of the manufacturing industries. I think for large enterprises, more than 500 million in turnover, you get into SAP. I think 60-70% of organizations is running SAP. SAP is a super good vendor for ERP systems. It comes with a lot of structure. It comes with a predefined structure, with a clear structured backbone of how you need to organize your organization. So it's awesome for running transactional processes because it's quite rigid. It comes with a structure, and you can stay working with that sort of model company that you have in front. But then when you get into planning, it's very different. Planning is very, very different in nature. Planning requires a large degree of configuration, of adaptability to the industry needs, and also on how you want to organize your planning processes as an organization, but also, like Bram said, linked to your strategy. So that's where we see that, where in the past a lot of companies chose by default for the planning module of the ERP vendor, that choosing for an APS system on top of an ERP system has become much more common and even more kind of the standards, because people need those additional flexibilities outside of their very structured and core SAP or ERP context.
So what is really new now in this world?
In this world, when we look at the diagram, I think there is innovation in several areas when it's about integration of budget planning, if it's about machine learning and on demand planning side. But what we have also invested on the last years is on how to bring a next step in, for example, that connectivity between the APS and the ERP system. And I think that brings us to one of the observations of the past years, where I think more than 5 years ago, we knew how to integrate with ERP systems and how to provide that connectivity, how to ensure that planning, which all starts with data, is being fed with data. And there we said, like, okay, we're not going to reinvent the wheel in every implementation. We had our templates, but they were not productized in a certain way. So that's where we and also our customers asked us, like, okay, let's work towards templatized native integration. And that's an area in the past 4 or 5 years where we have quite heavily have invested, and I've also found a large degree of success with customer needs on that area.
So, you showed a picture of a gasoline car. Shouldn't it be a Tesla with electricity onto it, and and in the evening you will get a rerun and a new update?
Yeah, indeed. Probably I should update my slide and then make it more eco-friendly and have it with a power plug into a Tesla. But the concept remains the same. It needs to be a plug. It's like the shape of how you fuel your car into how the hole is designed of your fuel tank. It's designed for it. It's just it immediately fits, and it fills up with whatever you need, if it's either fuel or either it's electricity. So it's a funny observation. Let me maybe work on that the next few days. Well, to give it a bit more context of what is that templatized about, well, we see that a bit depicted on the right side. It's just a quick screenshot of what we call templates at an object level. If you look at it, these are very classic requirements for supply chain planning models and supply chain planning processes. You need a bill of material, you need the material master, you need a customer master, you need plant orders, process orders. But that is what people understand. But in real life, these legacy ERP systems have quite a complexity behind on how that data can get out of the ERP system, but also how you can feed certain data back into it. And based upon what is referred to as metadata, by identifying all the objects and fields that are needed to feed these templates, that's captured in metadata, and that's what those templates consist about. So we have templates for a variety of ERP systems, of different vendors and different versions, which can be on-premise versions, but also much more than it used to be cloud versions with, for example, Microsoft Dynamics 365 in the cloud. And you asked me before the webinar about, like, okay, what is that funny thing of especially S/4HANA in the title? What do you mean with that? But what I observe currently when I talk with CIOs is that a lot of CIOs in SAP organizations have made it somehow their objective to ride the wave of implementing and upgrading towards S/4HANA. It's probably the SAP marketing machine that has, after SAP R3 and ECC, has pushed it into S/4HANA with a degree of new technologies behind that platform. And I see a lot of organizations quite heavily investing in upgrades, but also migrations to S/4HANA to further structure their ERP and structure their processes, their operational processes. So also in that context, it becomes very important that also as part of those migrations, that the planning can seamlessly migrate from a previous version towards, for example, S/4HANA as a context.
But but I see that a lot of companies have multiple ERP instances, sometimes more SAP instances, or they have from other ERP vendors like QRD or whatever. So the question would be, should you harmonize your whole ERP environment for supply chain reasons and supply chain planning reasons, or are you more depending on the interaction and integration with the open APIs with Archiva to let these templates tap into all the fields within different ERP systems to do the supply chain planning?
Yeah, so we encounter it as well. Companies with 14 ERP systems, it's not uncommon to encounter those. But often there is only just one supply chain to manage, and there is a lot of inabilities to manage and plan the end-to-end supply chain when there is not a platform where the data gets together. So for me, the aspect of bringing it on one ERP versus collecting it in a planning landscape, I think I would deconnect it. I would state like, for planning, for sure, you need to bring it together, and you need to bring it together today and not in 4 years from now, because that's often the timeline of bringing 14 ERP systems together. It's a timeline of 4 years or 5 years, and typically that's not acceptable to bring added value to the supply chain planning landscape and to managing the S&OP process. And it goes a lot faster to achieve those benefits and make those steps along the way on the planning landscape. So I would state, if they want to harmonize on the transactional level, fine, let the IT organization figure it out. But for planning, it needs to happen today, and it can be achieved.
And that's only about internal data. Let's talk about external data. If you want to, also include external data, you can get more benefits.
Yeah, indeed. I think we have a slide on that. And one of the external data that currently gains a lot of attention is macroeconomic data. During this time of recession, due to the COVID pandemic, we see that a lot of organizations are in the phase, have been in the phase or through the phases of understanding what is the impact of the recession exactly for my business, but what is my business? Well, you need to look at it from a market perspective. What are the end markets that you deliver, that you provide goods towards? Can be an architecture market, can be an automotive market, can be a chemical market. Will typically be a combination of those markets, and then understanding how has the impact been on these markets, and how are the recoveries evolving on those markets as well. And it has become very important to have line of visibility to that data, and also on how that evolves. Yeah. We see here on the overview like a variety of data sources that are being collected, and which we also collect in a large indicator cloud that we have established at Solventure. So we collect all those data elements, we bring that together continuously, because that data is being released on different moments during the month. So we continuously bring all of that data together, and then we actually bring it to our clients. That's has been one of the things that we have done during this COVID period. And yeah, at the bottom, it's a representation of how macroeconomic insights and leading indicators can provide visibility to changes in demand, upcoming changes in demand, which are referred to as inflection points, because traditional forecasting methods only look backwards, right? They just project whatever has happened in the past. So COVID has decreased with 70% your sales. Well, traditional methods will just extrapolate that to the next 3 months. So there you go. That's the alternative to just looking outside of the traditional forecasting methods.
Basically, it's very important, because these graphs represent the basis of, to make sure you don't get into the bullwhip effect, stop and run, that kind of environment.
Yeah, indeed. My understanding, is my business dependent upon what the market does, and are there some indicators which, for example, are leading with 2 or 3 months, and which can give me an early warning signal. And that's also what is represented on this overview. It has become our methodology over the past 3 years on how we utilize that indicator cloud environment, where there are more than 10 million indicators that are being collected continuously from different sources. And then how to get, because 10 million, it sounds fancy, right? Oh, 10 million, a lot, but how do you get to those few that actually matter for your end markets? And that's through what we refer to as a matching process, where you actually combine, the indicators, that large pool of indicators, you go match it with your sales patterns, with your sales dynamics, where we get to reduced sets of indicators, and eventually we will come to an indicator monitoring basket, which we will also have on the next slide. But after matching, we typically get into forecast modeling, where we build macroeconomic forecast models with some advanced techniques. And then we also use the resulting forecast as an early warning system towards the organization of what the direction is that the market is taking and what the impact is on the sales of the organization. And then the scenario planning brings a different ballgame. Like if you can state like, okay, oil price is maybe an indicator which has a leading effect on my sales patterns. Like, okay, what if oil price would increase with 10%, and I have a quantified model to assess that impact? Well, how can I assess what some variations or some impact of some indicators, what it could have on my business? That's what you get into that macroeconomic field of macroeconomic scenario planning field.
One observation, there is a statement called brute force statistics, as an input. That sounds like a bit like Donald Trump with bold statements. So how to use that. But on the other hand, I also know that, next to macroeconomic pulse, you have also microeconomic pulses like social media. I know that Lush is using Arkiva, with social media pulses leading to, better forecasting.
Yeah, indeed. So indeed, Arkiva has kind of focused on extracting from social media insights around how positive or negative certain communication is around products of individual companies, of CPG companies. So indeed, that are even signals that also are from the marketplace, which can be very relevant to bring into your own organization. So it brings us to, like, as an organization, it's important to bring the outside in, not only work with your inside data, with your BI data, which is most of the case, it's 99% just your own data from your own systems and from your own processes, but also work with signals and with data from outside to actually bring the outside in, because that outside is where a lot of the magic happens, right?
So you can actually create your own indicators, in a sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we brought an example today where we have an overview of what we refer to as indicator monitoring baskets. And I've pasted a lot of different screenshots on there, but we see, like, at the top left corner, we see a list of different indicators which have been selected. Typically, we get to 9 to 12 indicators. That's kind of the average amount of indicators which is worthwhile to kind of monitor for a certain end market on a monthly basis. So you see there indicators of different sources, some very specific in industrial production for certain types of products. So industrial production for tires, retail sales of tires. It's sometimes crazy that data exists. A lot of companies just don't know that data is available and is accessible to them. So it's bringing those data points to them, visualizing it, of course, understanding how these indicators have evolved over time, but then going to the more bottom left and right corner is getting the insights forward and bringing it towards dashboards, indicator dashboards, where you see the analytics, you see the insights of multiple indicators at the same time. And lately we have been focusing on indicator release notifications, because those indicators, they are released at different moments during the month. So nobody is watching that every single day on different statistics bureaus when certain indicators are going to be released and which ones are relevant to you. So what we have provided to clients is to ensure that you get notified about okay, this has been an indicator that is relevant to you, and what is the latest data point, what is the change in the data point, and then bringing it to how does that help you understand the market dynamics behind.
Right. Well, we started out with the S&OP. So what's beyond S&OP? Where does it all leading to?
Yeah, I'll take back over that question. It also comes back, Martijn, to if we have the triangle at the beginning, what's now the role of supply chain? Where does it stop and where does it start? And what is more and more becoming our vision at Solventure is that we say, okay, there's clearly different layers of planning. You have what Gartner calls the S&OE, sales and operations execution. You have S&OP, which is the more tactical level. Finance is doing typically its own financial planning and budgeting. We also have strategic plans. And what you see at the top here, the strategic target setting is linked to the strategy question you asked. So if you are a product leader or if you are a operational excellence player, well, both will have the ambition to generate 20% return on capital employed. Why? Because P&G has been generating 20% ROCE over the last 20 years. So if you don't generate 20%, you're less attractive to investors, to talent, and you name it. So we all want to get to 20% ROCE, but a hard discounter, for instance, will do it with less margin and less inventories and less investment in shop floor space and DC space and so on. Whereas if you differentiate, take Albert Heijn or you take Deleuze or Carrefour, if you have a broader assortment, you have a longer tail, more inventory, bigger shops, bigger DCs, and you have it. So, but a bigger assortment should drive a premium, a better margin. So we need to connect all of these. And I think every company has S&OE. Why? Because you need to plan your manufacturing. If you don't plan for next week, you will get bankrupt. So first challenge is really to convince companies that instead of firefighting and being excellent firefighters or problem solvers, we need to prevent problems from happening. And that's really what happens if you go from S&OP to from S&OE to S&OP. Once we get to S&OP, we say, but we want to get management buy-in, and we have an executive S&OP meeting, but it's poorly attended. So we try to monetize the plan, and we try to take over part of the financial planning process, but not full of the process. So that's probably what is called IBP. So it's monetizing the plan, but in the end, finance is still doing its own planning processes in their own tools and with their own additions to it. Well, we really believe that if we really want to balance the triangle, we need to connect everything from the more strategic level up to the S&OE level, and that's a concept which we call integrated value planning and execution. And so over the summer I've been working on a new book that will normally be released early next year. And really saying, well, if we really want to bring balance to the triangle, we need to further increase the ambition in integrating those different planning processes, and the one driving the integration should be supply chain. And if supply chain is doing that will also put really supply chain central to the triangle we started with at the beginning of this webinar.
You know, I was talking to Oliver White a few years ago, and the CEO of Oliver White said, you know, if you do IBP right, you don't have to have a budget planning phase, you know, September, October, November. Will have a rolling budget all through the year. Do you believe that companies will stop creating a budget and will use their IBP financial figures to do their budgeting?
Yes, I believe everybody should. Why? Because what we are doing today is complete nonsense. So we have a planning process run by supply chain. It's called S&OP. Finance has its separate planning process. So we double the effort, and then we triple the effort because we try to integrate the two plans. So that's complete nonsense. if you look at what is the heart of budgeting, well, the heart of budgeting is I need to calculate the cost of goods sold. What's the cost of goods sold? It's the direct material cost and it's the labor cost. How do you calculate direct material and labor cost? You calculate it through the BOM and through routings. Well, so the core of budgeting or financial planning is exactly the same as the core of S&OP. So what we are doing today doesn't make sense, and the question is, and that's a stretch, but my vision is that, well, as long as we put the two processes in two separate hands, one being finance and the other being supply chain, we can keep chasing the dream of IBP for the next 15 years. So it would be much easier if we say, well, let's make supply chain responsible for financial planning and budgeting as well. That will it will automatically integrate into processes and into one tool set. And it doesn't mean that supply chain needs to become responsible for investor relations or should start talking to the banks. But I think we will need to change the organization model to really make this happen. But I'm a big believer that we should stop duplicating or tripling the efforts by having parallel processes which are 80% the same and doing it in different tool sets. That doesn't make sense.
But one of the key problems, I think, or challenges within companies is, calculate the total cost to serve per SKU. Because if you are able to do that, you have a better discussion about segmentation on the product and the customer level. So as long as we don't have cracked the nut of total cost to serve, then we will still be in this stupid game.
Well, that's what you are saying, Martijn, is even going beyond this. What I'm saying, if we would already just used the standard costs which are currently in the system, that would already help us to align the budgeting process and the S&OP process, right? You are taking it one step further and then you say, yeah, but you know what, that standard cost, it contains a lot of allocations which don't make sense. So if we really want to steer the business, we need to take it one step further and we need to come to the true cost to serve to better understand what is the true margin of individual product and customer segments. And I'm fully aligned with that, but that's taking it even one step further. So I would almost say let's first take the first step, and then we can build on that to take the next refinement and come to an even more true segmentation, so to speak.
And now a lot of companies have zero budget marketing, so maybe you should have a zero budget supply chain. And then you get a different notion of how to get there.
Well, I'm a fan of budgeting. Why? Because budgeting, also if you look at it from the strategic planning, in the sense that, okay, if you don't have a budget, the question is, what is then the target? So I think it makes sense to have different planning layers and say, okay, I want to know where I want to be in 5 years time or 10 years time. What's the long-term ambition? Do I want to be Apple, or do I want to be a private label player, which is decent quality but at the lowest possible cost? What is the strategic roadmap which will bring me there? What is the efficiency in my assets? Or what is my innovation capability, and how should I improve that, also from a supply chain perspective? And your budget does fix next year's ambition, and a budget figure, you know what, it's okay that it provides a little stretch. So I think it makes sense that the S&OP forecast is different from the budget, because if your S&OP forecast would just be the same as the budget, you can't create the ambition or put the stretch. So I do think budgeting does make sense, and it helps in fixing the next year investments in CapEx and OpEx, and it helps in creating a certain stretch, and the S&OP can be the monthly figure to the pulse. So I wouldn't throw away budgeting, but it needs to be more integrated. Now we just spend a lot of time trying to understand why the S&OP figures don't match with the budget figures. Well, that's not really helpful, right? That's not creating value. But having a budget which creates a certain stretch, I still do see value in that type of in that aspect of the budgeting process. Not the Excel hell that many people are going through today.
No. And we still have actually 1 minute before the hour, so we have some time for questions. But otherwise, I would have another question. So I was wondering, and people, type away your questions if you have any questions. I was wondering, how do you differentiate your KPIs in the supply chain? Because is OTAFE always the one KPI you have to strive for?
I think what we see is it's about different metrics and the balance between the metrics. That you need to think about what are your service metrics and what are the service metrics which are supporting your strategy, right? Mm-hmm. If you are a product leader, then the time to market may be more important than the on time in full. Yeah. And also the scalability. So how fast can I double the volume of a certain product might be more important than the cost. So I see many S&OP meetings where we have 5 slides of forecast accuracy, and then we have 5 slides of on time in full, and then we have 5 slides of inventory. No, it's really about, you need to bring it together into a story and tie it to your strategy. I think that's a challenge. Yeah, that's a stretch, but that's certainly the type of discussion we try to have with our clients, and that's the type of things we try to bring to the table when we configure our Kiva dashboards.
So basically, you have to not have 5 different slides of inventory and motive, whatever, but on each slide, more on a product segment or whatever, and then you have this triangle on a product segment.
Yep. And put KPIs in a context. So if you don't have the lowest cost, that could be a deliberate decision, because you say, for this segment, we want to be scalable, and if something happens in the market, we want to grab market share fast. Well, then that's what you need to measure, and that's not, if you don't think about the strategic context, that's not a measure people are going to put in their dashboard, and then you can keep hitting the nail of the cost, and then the cost will go down. But if you then need the scalability, you will miss the opportunity in the market completely. Then you have a service drama, and then we just circle back between KPIs. So that's what you want to avoid.
So basically, a part of your tooling, your software, your Artiva software, you also provide some advice how to do, well, the actual S&OP meetings.
Yes, and I think that's when it comes to dashboarding, there are more tools than there's plenty. Dashboarding is commodity, so to speak. So it's not about, do you have a dashboarding capability? The question is, how do we build the dashboards, and how do we compile dashboards, and what's the story we tie around it? Because that will make the difference whether you get senior executives engaged or whether they get bored after slide number 15. And that's not a tooling question, that's more an expertise question, and having that somewhat broader context, which is the supply chain and the strategic context.
So, one thing from my side, and also from the audience probably, is so how does machine learning and AI fit in this world of S&OP?
Well, machine learning and AI is, and we can also comment, I think that's the newer form of analytics. And if you look at S&OP, well, the traditional statistical forecasting has been around for 30 years. Optimization based on linear programming has been around for 30 years. And AI will play a role. I think AI is especially useful when it comes to the shorter term demand sensing, to name something, because there's a lot of information. It can be unstructured information. AI can also be applied in the more midterm demand sensing, like Nick referred to. AI can be applied in optimizing the forecast hierarchy and the forecast parameter. So I think AI is a newer form of analytics, and analytics has always been an important piece. I think of powering supply chain planning, and also a company like Arqiva is doing a lot of investments in that area, like the Lush example you referred to, and also from our side as Solventure, we are investigating in the knowledge, and we are even developing our own tools to basically enhance existing Arqiva capabilities.
So basically, the better systems can recognize what weather patterns will do to your business, to your forecast, what impact it has, and the software could learn which algorithm is fitting the best depending on certain situations or not.
Yeah, so what algorithm fits the best, what type of data fits the best, and I think that's still a bit that will still have to sort out. I think AI can do many things, but AI is not always is still not good at doing them all at the same time. So, but sorting out which data is relevant is something AI can do. Sorting out which forecasting techniques seems better is also something AI can sort out. What is the level of detail on which to forecast is something AI can sort out. So I do see multiple current applications, and that will go in fast evolution, or that will keep in fast evolution over the next few years. It's clear there's also a lot of research going into that area at Arqiva, at Solventure, but also at other companies.
Yeah.
A lot of the topics we discussed, we have vision papers which describe things in more detail. This has really been a cross overview of a lot of topics. So I hope it was inspiring, and if people do have questions, if they also drop those questions, we will follow up and send more information to them.
Okay. Bram, Nick, thank you for your expertise and your explanation, and to the audience, thank you for joining and listening, and I would like to wrap it up. So thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Martijn.
Thank you, Martijn. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.